It was the closest of his associates to the Croxteth Park estate, so he could get there quickly and get off the streets as quick as possible. And also, Boy M was only 15 years old at the time.
He was just 11 years old, walking home from football, a route he'd taken dozens of times before. But on this warm summer evening, that short walk would end in unimaginable violence. One single gunshot shattered a family, froze a community, and shocked an entire nation. There were no warnings, no arguments, no connection between victim and killer. Just a boy in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a feud that was never his. As panic spread through the streets of Liverpool, parents pulled their children indoors, police raced against silence, and a desperate family begged for answers. Who would pull a trigger in a pub car park? Why was a gun even there? And how did an innocent child become collateral damage? This is the heartbreaking story of Rhys Jones and the hunt for the truth that followed. On the Croxteth Park estate in Liverpool, life moved at a familiar, unremarkable pace. Tree-lined streets, neatly kept houses, children playing out until dusk. For families who had lived there for years, it felt safe. The kind of place where parents didn't hesitate to let their kids walk to football training or cycle to the shops. Among those families was the Jones household. Rhys Jones was the heart of that home. 11 years old, full of energy, permanently smiling, and utterly obsessed with football. Everything in his life revolved around the game. School days were endured only because training came after. Weekends were measured in matches, goals, and muddy kits left by the door. Coaches noticed it early. The power in his kick, the way he read the game, the confidence that stood out even among older boys. At home, he was cheeky, affectionate, and impossible to stay angry with. The kind of child who made people laugh without trying. His parents, Mel and Steve, built their lives around giving their boys stability, encouragement, and freedom. Football wasn't just a hobby. It was Rhys's identity, his joy, his future. August 22nd, 2007 began like any other summer day. Warm, bright, ordinary. There were plans for school uniforms, evening training, and watching England play later that night. Nothing about the day hinted at what was coming. That evening, Rhys headed out to football training near the Fir Tree pub, a short walk from home. It was a route he'd taken countless times. The pitch sat just behind the pub, close to the small row of shops that acted as the estate's unofficial center. Parents chatted, kids kicked balls against fences, cars came and went. The pub car park, busy because of the good weather and a football match on TV, was filled with people enjoying the evening. Training went well. Laughter, shouts, boots thudding against the ball. Rhys ran hard, eager as ever, but midway through he realized he'd forgotten his $5 signing-on fee. Embarrassed and anxious to sort it out, he bolted home without hesitation. Back at the house, he burst through the door, breathless and impatient. His mom handed him the money. Because he was now running late, his dad offered to drive him back to training. Just a couple of minutes up the road, Rhys climbed into the car, kissed his mom goodbye, and promised he'd be back in time to watch the England match. That was the last normal moment. After training finished, one of the coaches offered him a lift home. It was a simple offer, made casually, the kind of thing that happens every day. But Rhys, confident and independent, refused. He insisted he'd walk. He always did. He set off alone, heading across the familiar shortcut through the Fir Tree pub car park. The distance from the pitch to his front door was barely 5 minutes. At the same time, something else was unfolding. Something Rhys had no way of seeing or understanding. That night, tensions between rival youth gangs from neighboring estates were simmering. Long-standing grudges, territorial disputes, and reckless bravado had escalated far beyond words. Guns, real firearms, were now part of the equation. A teenage boy, barely older than Rhys himself, was riding through the area on a BMX bike, armed and looking for someone else entirely. The intended targets were two older boys from a rival group. Rhys was not involved. He wasn't known to them. He wasn't even aware they were nearby. As Rhys crossed the pub car park, the gunman fired. The first shot missed its intended targets. The second did not. Rhys collapsed instantly. A witness screamed. Someone shouted that a child had been shot. People ran toward him in horror, unsure of what they were seeing. Blood pooled beneath his head. Panic spread through the crowd. His father, still nearby in his car, heard his son's name screamed. He turned in time to see Rhys fall. In seconds, the ordinary summer evening became a crime scene. A woman from the pub dropped to the ground beside Rhys, trying desperately to help. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else called the police. His father knelt nearby, frozen between hope and terror, telling his son over and over that he would be okay, even as the reality in front of him made that impossible to believe. When Rhys's mother arrived, the crowd parted. She ran to her son, cradled his head, begged him to open his eyes. The world narrowed to that patch of tarmac, to the sound of sirens approaching, to the unbearable sight of a child bleeding in his football kit. Paramedics fought to save him. They rushed him to hospital. Doctors worked frantically, but the damage was catastrophic. Rhys never regained consciousness. That night, Liverpool learned that an 11-year-old boy had been shot dead while walking home from football. Shock rippled through the city. Anger followed close behind. This wasn't gang violence contained within criminal circles. This was a child, a bystander, killed in a public place, surrounded by families. On a school night, parents locked doors, children were kept indoors. The estate fell silent. Police launched one of the largest murder investigations Merseyside had ever seen. Hundreds of officers were deployed. CCTV footage was seized. Witness statements flooded in. Detectives knew immediately that the shooting was gang-related, but identifying the gunman would be far more difficult. The killer had vanished within seconds, riding away on his bike through wooded paths that separated the estates. The gun was gone, the bike was gone, and fear had taken hold. Within hours, rumors spread, names were whispered, social media filled the gaps with speculation, but evidence was thin, and silence within the community was thick. Rhys's parents stood before cameras, their grief raw and visible, pleading for anyone who knew something to come forward. Their message was simple and devastating. If the killer wasn't stopped, it could happen again. Someone knew who did this, and the hunt for that truth had only just begun. By morning, the Croxteth Park estate felt unrecognizable. Where children once played freely, doors stayed shut, parents kept curtains drawn. The familiar sounds of everyday life were replaced by police radios, forensic vans, and the low murmur of fear. An 11-year-old boy had been murdered in public, and everyone understood what that meant. The rules had changed. For Merseyside Police, the pressure was immediate and immense. This was not just another gang-related shooting. This was a child, an innocent bystander, killed on his way home from football. The force mobilized at scale. Senior detectives were pulled from other cases. An incident room was established within hours. Hundreds of officers were assigned to what would become one of the largest murder investigations in the region's history. The first priority was the crime scene. The Fir Tree Pub car park was sealed off. Forensic teams worked through the night, marking shell casings, measuring blood patterns, collecting fibers. Witnesses described chaos. 3 shots fired in rapid succession, a teenager on a BMX bike, disappearing almost instantly. No one had seen the gunman's face clearly. No one could give a confident description, but one detail kept surfacing: the bike. Multiple witnesses independently described a teenage boy riding a BMX, stopping briefly, firing the weapon, then fleeing at speed. That consistency mattered. It gave detectives something tangible to chase. CCTV became the next lifeline. Cameras from the pub, nearby shops, residential streets, and traffic routes were seized. Officers painstakingly reconstructed the gunman's movements frame by frame. Grainy footage showed a lone rider circling the area before the shooting, scanning, searching, waiting. After the shots, the same figure was captured riding away, narrowly missing traffic as he crossed into a wooded area separating Croxteth Park from a neighboring estate. The footage was haunting, not just because it showed the killer in motion, but because it showed how young he was. Investigators now believed the gunman was a teenager, possibly only a few years older than Rhys himself. That realization changed everything. The inquiry shifted focus to known youth gangs operating in the area. Intelligence units already had files, names, rivalries, previous incidents. One group in particular stood out, a loose network of teenagers linked to ongoing disputes with a neighboring estate. And one name began to surface repeatedly. Sean Mercer was known to police despite his young age. He had a history of minor offenses, an antisocial behavior order, and known associations with the local gang. Almost immediately after the shooting, his name began circulating, not just among officers, but online, in whispers, in texts, and on social media. But suspicion is not evidence. Police moved fast. Within days, Mercer and several associates were arrested. Homes were searched. Bikes were seized, phones were examined, identification parades were arranged with witnesses who had been present at the pub car park. Then came the first major setback. None of the eyewitnesses could positively identify Mercer as the gunman. The bikes recovered from his home didn't match the BMX seen on CCTV. Mercer provided a prepared statement through his solicitor, claiming he was elsewhere at the time. One of his friends backed up that account. Even his mother supported his version of events. Legally, the case was collapsing before it had fully formed. With no murder weapon, no matching bike, and no eyewitness identification, police were forced to release Mercer and the others back into the community. The reaction was explosive. To the public, and especially to Rhys's family, it felt unthinkable. How could the person everyone believed was responsible simply walk free? But detectives knew the truth was more complex. They had intelligence, not proof. And without proof, there could be no charge. Behind closed doors, officers acknowledged something far more troubling. A wall of silence had descended. People knew what had happened. They had seen it. They had heard things. But fear of retaliation, of gang consequences, of being labeled a grass, kept mouths shut. This wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was a test of whether the community would help stop a killer. Meanwhile, Rhys's parents lived inside a nightmare they couldn't wake from. Their son's face was everywhere, on the news, in newspapers, on posters. Vigils were held. Football shirts were laid at the pub gates. Thousands attended his funeral at Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral, the city united in grief, and still, no arrest. Behind the scenes, police regrouped. If witnesses wouldn't talk, technology would have to. Investigators turned to mobile phone data, call logs, cell tower pings, message records. Every phone connected to known associates was mapped against CCTV timelines. Slowly, patterns emerged. Calls placed shortly before the shooting, messages exchanged minutes after, phones moving in coordination with the CCTV rider's route. The digital footprint didn't lie, even if people did. Investigators began reconstructing the night not minute by minute, but second by second. The picture that emerged was chilling. Mercer had left his home earlier that evening on a BMX. CCTV placed him moving through known gang areas. Phone records suggested he had been alerted that rival youths were near the pub. Detectives now believed the gun had been collected shortly before the shooting from an associate's address. Rhys had simply crossed the wrong path at the worst possible moment. After the shooting, the phone records told another story. Frantic calls, rapid movement, multiple people converging at a single location. The killer hadn't acted alone. Others had helped him escape. Others had helped him clean up. The case was no longer just murder. It was conspiracy. Police identified a crucial location, the home of a younger teenager, referred to in court only as Boy X. Intelligence suggested Mercer had gone there immediately after the shooting. Why there? Because Boy X was young, impressionable, and unlikely to challenge him. That house became the turning point. When officers searched it, they made the discovery they had been praying for. Hidden inside was the murder weapon. Forensic tests confirmed it was the same gun used to kill Rhys Jones. Gunshot residue matched particles found on Rhys's clothing. The wall of silence had finally cracked, but not completely, because finding the gun wasn't enough. Someone still had to explain how it got there, and that explanation would come at a cost. Finding the gun changed everything, but it didn't end the silence. Detectives now had the murder weapon, but they still needed a human voice willing to explain how it moved from the killer's hands to a hiding place. Without that link, the defense would argue coincidence, contamination, or misdirection. The case still rested on a fragile edge. That voice came from the last place anyone expected. Boy X was only 15, younger than most of the people now orbiting the investigation. He wasn't a core gang member, not hardened, not confident. He was chosen precisely because of that. Investigators believed he had been used, pressured into silence by fear rather than loyalty. When police brought him in again, the weight finally broke him. He described a knock at the door that night. Panic, urgency, a package pushed into his hands, a command, not a request. He was told to hide it and say nothing. He knew enough to understand the danger of refusing. That package was the gun. For detectives, this statement was seismic. It explained the weapon's journey, tied it directly back to the shooter, and confirmed what they had suspected all along, that the murder of an 11-year-old boy had triggered a coordinated cover-up involving multiple people, some of them adults. But there was a dilemma. Boy X was admitting to handling a murder weapon. Without protection, he would face prosecution. With protection, the case could move forward. The decision landed with the Crown Prosecution Service, and it was not taken lightly. Granting immunity to a teenager in a murder case is rare, but the calculus was simple. Without his testimony, the killer might never be convicted. After careful review, immunity was approved, on one condition: he had to tell the full truth. Once that decision was made, the floodgates opened. Boy X explained how, after the shooting, calls went out to trusted associates. A car was arranged, petrol was brought, clothing was burned in an industrial lockup. The shooter was doused to destroy forensic evidence. The BMX bike, the most visually damning piece of the crime, was stripped and disposed of. This wasn't panic, it was planning. Phone records supported every part of the story. CCTV corroborated vehicle movements. Witness accounts that once felt disjointed now snapped into alignment like pieces of a long broken mirror. The silence that had protected the group for months was gone. Police moved quickly. At dawn, coordinated arrests swept across Liverpool. Doors were forced, phones seized, adults were taken into custody alongside teenagers. Parents who had lied to police were questioned. Associates who thought they were untouchable found themselves facing charges of assisting an offender. The message was unmistakable. Helping a child killer would not be treated as a lesser crime. The most damaging revelation came from inside the killer's own home. Investigators discovered that the BMX bike used in the shooting had been there after the murder and deliberately hidden from police. When officers had searched the house earlier, they had been told those were the only bikes present. That statement was false. Forensics later recovered the stripped frame elsewhere. DNA confirmed what detectives already knew. The lie wasn't about confusion, it was about protection. With every new piece of evidence, the case hardened. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the file again, this time with witness testimony, forensic matches, digital trails, and a coherent narrative of conspiracy. The threshold had been crossed, charges were authorized. Nearly 14 months after Rhys Jones was killed, those responsible were finally brought before the court. The trial was long, painfully long. For Rhys's family, each day meant hearing the details they had tried to escape, how their son was shot, how he fell, how help came too late, how others prioritized self-preservation over a child's life. The defendants sat together, often showing little emotion, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering among themselves. That behavior did not go unnoticed. Jurors listened as the prosecution dismantled the defense piece by piece. The BMX route, the phone calls, the petrol cans, the weapon, the lies, the immunity deal. Each strand alone might have been questioned. Together, they formed a net with no gaps. The defense argued youth, influence, poor judgment. The prosecution argued responsibility. When the verdict came, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty. The man who fired the shot was convicted of murder. Others were convicted of assisting him, helping him escape justice, destroy evidence, and lie to authorities. The sentence reflected the gravity of what had been done, though for Rhys's family, no number of years could ever feel enough. Justice, in the legal sense, had been delivered, but the cost remained. An 11-year-old boy who loved football, a family permanently fractured, a community that would never see its streets the same way again, and a case that forced an uncomfortable truth into the open. Guns were in the hands of children, and silence had allowed it to happen. The trial ended, but its echo didn't, because the question lingered long after the courtroom emptied. What happens now? The courtroom eventually emptied, but nothing truly ended there. For Rhys's parents, the verdict brought a kind of closure that never feels complete. Justice, as defined by law, had been served. The man who pulled the trigger would spend decades behind bars. Those who helped him hide, lie, and erase evidence were also punished. And yet the absence remained louder than any sentence ever could, because justice doesn't bring a child home. Rhys should have been growing up. He should have been arguing with his brother, annoying his parents, dreaming about football, worrying about school, planning weekends. Instead, his life had been reduced to dates, evidence numbers, and witness statements. An entire future collapsed into a single moment in a pub car park.